The Umbra, remains of the lost Old One. Welcome, gentle listener, I am Baldermort, your faithful servant, and I wish to introduce you to the forces, factions, and faces of the Warhammer 40k universe, the grim darkness of the far future, where there is no time for peace, there is only time for war. And today, we shall be discussing a rather rare and oft-ignored part of the lore. Now most who have been interested in the setting have bumped into many a mention of the Old Ones, and most will know that they were wiped out by the Catan and the Necrons in the first conflagration that nearly destroyed the entire Milky Way galaxy, also known as the War in Heaven. But did you know that one of the Old Ones supposedly escaped their extermination, that they survived all the way up to the Age of Strife? Worshipped by the dread Hrad, even to this day, for they believe that it will return to them and lead them in the last days. Of course, I can only be speaking of Ka, the last Old One. Yet, it was slain and its form cursed by its murderer. We shall get to all of this in due course, but first, let us hear a wee tale to show, not just tell, of these extremely rare phenomena. The Umbra. From the Bald Library, a word. One word. It crashes around my mind like a dreadnought caught in the midst of a rage, smashing into everything, denting, bending, crushing, resounding. It has been weeks now, yet still I cannot shake the echo in my mind. When I wake, it is to sweat-drenched sheets, which I then have to wring into the water reclamators. It is the most precious of resources, and we cannot lose even a drop to tardiness or laziness. A morning ritual I do not look forward to. I had spoken to the apothecaries, of course, but they gave me ineffectual tinctures, bothersome but useless balms. I walk to my station and hear the word whispered in every corridor I pass, each doorway into a room I will never enter. Yet if I stop to see who has mouthed this unwelcome utterance, I find nobody there, or people clearly in raucous discussion. None could or would have done this. Yet I hear it. When I close my eyes, I see it again. Then I hear it again. Those moments that seem scorched onto my very soul. It was supposed to be a simple supply run, as some would say it. Those who live on land, planets, or stations. Those who will never understand the situation we place ourselves in whenever we travel. For nothing is certain. If you sleep on a planet, you know the sun will rise in the morning. You know the air will be present. The land beneath your feet will be as it always was when you went to sleep. But this is not the case for us. We travelers, we explorers, we daring souls. Nothing can be taken for granted when you ply the stars. Nothing at all. For each time we set out, each time we return, we do so through the agency of the warp. And in this realm, anything and everything can happen. Yet when we come from that place, when we tear a hole back into real space and return to reality, it is usually over. We have all heard how things can be brought through the warp, can hide on a ship and travel with us, and that they are always malevolent. But this is scuttlebutt. It is whispers from the old and infirm, the young and wide-eyed. Those who will believe anything, or will convey anything to gain attention and a mere moment of being useful and important, simply by the knowledge of a thing. Or so I thought. I used to sneer at such things. Not anymore. For this time, they were right, and I was wrong. We translated back into the void, And there it simply was. I turned from my menial tasks, loading and unloading, counting and noting. Mine was usually a thankless task. I once pretended that if I had simply guessed at each of these details, that not one person on the ship or in the Imperium entire would give a Grox's fart. But it is my role, so I do it. I do it to the best of my ability. I do it for him, for the Emperor. But on that day, I walked with my recording device, the inks and scrolls, and I saw it. Hovering there in the middle of our hangar bay, large, spherical, dark, reflective, a ball of I did not know what. Others caught on quickly and gasped and backed away, making the sign of the Aquila. It did nothing at start, just floated there. And, as I found out later in hushed conversations that had been banned by that point, we all felt the same. It was watching us. Someone contacted the bridge, and down came a gaggle of officers. High rankers who we would usually only see when they were embarking for transit to a planet or station. Stuffed shirts and starched clothes. They were every bit as stiff as their attire. And they, who were supposed to know everything there was to know about voidcraft, having gone through the Schola Progenium, they scratched their heads as much as we did. It did not bob. It did not move. It just floated there, silent. Right in the middle of the bay. Some were trapped behind it, unable to get to an exit without passing closer to it than anyone would dare. There was a mild chortle that only I and others close to the officers could hear. Then one of them cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted for the trapped menials to try to make it around the thing. As they got closer, the thing seemed to shift, like it rotated, but still in place. Although this was more of a sensation, as it was perfectly spherical, no front, no back, yet it seemed to note the movement near it. And the horror began. Inky blackness from beneath it formed up and, it's difficult to describe. It was as if the shadows became solid, as if it weaponized darkness itself. Tendrils shot out from near the globe and slashed towards the menials closest. And it cut them in half. Darkness. It was as sharp as a power sword, as swift as a lasgun, as deadly as an Astartes. And the menials simply, they fell apart. It cut them to ribbons. The chortling from the officers cut off immediately. They called for the room to be cleared. I slunk backwards only a pace or two. I was in shadow all of this time. Now, when I look back, I cannot believe I did that. I hid within an area that I had just seen used as a means of slaughter. But I wanted to see what they would do. In a life of counting and recording and counting, this was perhaps the most exciting thing that would ever happen to me. I wanted to witness it all. I did not once think of the cost. The deck cleared as every menial but me rushed to obey. They dropped whatever they held and ran like it would follow them. Some were knocked over as they barged each other at the bay entryway, so frantic to escape. The next moments were quiet as the officers talked and talked, but so secretively that I could not hear them. I simply watched on. Then voidsmen at arms filled the place. All were armed heavily. The officers all withdrew from the bay as the armsmen set up a semicircle around the thing. Then it got messy. For the voidsmen shot as one, lasgun beams tearing towards the thing en masse, yet they bounced clear off its surface, being sent all over the bay. The thing retorted. Tendrils of shadow moved across the deck and tore into the men, like trees of darkness blooming and burrowing into them in nanoseconds. Many died, The rest backed off and backed up. It looked bad, until another squad entered, and one of the voidsmen had a rotating long-barreled weapon. It fired off not las fire, but solid slugs. And this hit the globe, cracking it. He did not relent and kept the fire pouring into it. The cracks became larger, and finally it shattered, and white goop spilled from the huge fractures in it. The whole thing dropped and smashed on the ground. It happened. A whirlwind in my mind, all of us together, holding our heads and screaming, as it felt like our brains were expanding and would spill out of our very ears. I saw a figure in my mind, shattering as the globe had. Then that one word resounded in every part of me. It was so loud, it seemed to be shouted. But the sound did not come from my ears, but seemingly echoing through my very soul. That one word. Linger. What did it mean? How could it say words in our language when it was dead? Did it linger? Or did we? A day I will never forget. A day I can never discuss with anyone, for all the voidsmen were then transferred to other duties, or simply had accidents. Every single one of them. Nobody knew I was in the room. Nobody noticed me. I cannot get that word out of my mind. What did it mean? Why that one word? Linger. The Umbra. Now, the following is a simple entry, as there are no others, so let me relate what I have read from Xenology. To quote, "The Umbra are an alien species appearing as smooth black spheres that live in the void of space, often observed attracted to areas that resonate of the warp, such as starship hulls and warp engines, or suspected entrances to the Elder Webway. They can manipulate and control shadows to form terrifying limbs of hooks, blades, teeth, and other nightmarish shapes. The Umbra are not an organism in the standard sense, as no obvious means of motion, respiration, digestion, nor excretion are evident. It is the speculation that the sphere image is merely a small reflection of the whole creature, with the rest of the true form existing in another dimension other than the prime material. They are comprised of an outer shell made of an unknown glossy, brittle, and untextured substance, showing swirling pearlescent patterns. An inner cavity is below this, and surrounds a liquid core of impossible to analyze white liquid that appears non-Newtonian, prone to random solidification and variation in density, and seems to be frictionless. The Umbra can manipulate areas of shadow like oil to form shadow limb weapons, such as hooks, blades, teeth, and the like. Upon death, the Umbra have been witnessed to utter a psychic death shriek into the minds of those nearby. In the case of a dissection of an Umbra specimen, this was expressed as intense cranial pain, accompanied by a flicker of images showing a humanoid figure splintering apart, a warp storm, and deep space, and finally, followed by a single word: linger. The swirling pattern of the Umbra shell is also observed to become inert upon death. The Umbra have been observed to show a direct aversion to light, a possible weakness encountering them. End quote. So, this is all very interesting, but we need to discuss that most elusive of all beings, Q-A-H. Ka. Ka is a deity belonging to the pantheon of gods that existed during the period of war between the Necrontyr and the Old Ones, called the Slahai, meaning most ancient. Slaanesh destroyed Ka by splitting him into pieces, trapping the pieces halfway between the real world and the warp. How this occurred is unknown, but those pieces formed into beings now known as the Umbra. Ka is known as he who lingers by the Hrad, because Slaanesh banished him to linger forever. Occasionally, when an Umbra dies, it psychically screams linger, in reference to Ka. Ka was, and still is, worshipped by the nocturnal race known as the Hrad. Their legends state he told them before his destruction that he would return during the time of the Rahid Sko, or tribe gathering, to defeat the Yam Ko, the Khatan. End quote. Heavy stuff, I'm sure you will agree, and for me, it shows that an Old One potentially survived the war in heaven. Now, I have mentioned on a few occasions that I believe that this last Old One, Ka, was a progenitor of the human race. For everything seems to line up. But for that, please see my video on the most potent souls in Warhammer. Links will be in the description to this video. One wonders if the prophecy was right, and that Ka will return, by absorbing all of his constituent parts and re-emerging as a leader of the forces of good in the last battle. As the Eldar call it, the Ranadandra. Now Ka is far more important to another race, the Hrad, as we have heard, and it does strike me that I have not covered this incredibly interesting race. So let's see what the next few weeks bring, eh? I have been Baldermort, your faithful servant. If you have enjoyed this brief video, then don't forget to slap me a like and an assistive comment if you have the time. And consider subscribing if you want more of the same. If you do, then hit the notifications button, as I would not want you to miss out. Hopefully see you Friday. Now, no matter what you do today, do try to make some time for fun. Toodaloo.